Hey, what's up everyone? This is Music Tech Help Guy, and you know, it's that time again. Logic Pro 11 is finally here. After over a decade on version 10, we finally made the jump up to 11. Not only do we have Logic Pro 11, we're also getting Logic Pro for iPad version 2, and we have parity on this update. So all of the new features that are available in Logic Pro 11 for Mac are also available in Logic Pro for iPad 2. So I'm not going to do two separate videos like I normally do, but for examples in this video, I'm going to be showing off mainly the macOS version of Logic 11. With this update, this is probably the first time we've heard Apple embrace the term AI, and a lot of the updates in this new version rely heavily on AI studio assistants, as Apple is calling them, to assist you in your music composition and production. There's a new stem splitter functionality built in where you can isolate the vocals, drums, bass, and other instruments like guitars and keys. There are two new session players. In addition to drummer, we now have a bass player and a keyboard player that can follow your musical arrangement with the brand new global chord track. Drummer has also been updated with a brand new interface with more features and more controls. And while we're talking about drummer, the entire drum kit designer library has been completely remixed. There are two new instruments to go with the new bass player and keyboard player: Studio Bass that has 6 new sample-based bass instruments, and Studio Piano with 4 new sample-based piano instruments. There's a new effects plugin called ChromaGlow, which is an AI-powered saturation plugin that is modeled after several real-world hardware units. There's a new real-time bounce in place function. This is great if you work with outboard mixing hardware or hardware synthesizers. And the final update is kind of a blink and you'll miss it minor update. There are several new key commands for controlling the position of the Marquee tool. And as always, there are several under the hood enhancements and improvements, new sound library content, and a new demo song, Swing by Ellie Dixon. And because everyone always asks, Logic Pro 11 requires macOS 13.5 or later. Logic Pro for iPad 2 requires an iPad with an Apple A12 Bionic chip or later, running iPadOS 17.4 or later. However, some features for Logic for iPad will require an iPad with an M1 chip or later. Pricing-wise, Logic for iPad is still a monthly or yearly subscription, and Logic Pro 11 is still a one-time purchase. But here's the best part. If you bought Logic Pro 10 at any point in its lifespan, you will get Logic Pro 11 for free. So it's a completely free upgrade. You don't have to pay for it again. Okay, so as always, I'll go through and demonstrate each of these 11 new features in Logic Pro 11. And if you want to skip around in the video, I've left chapters below so you can skip to the features that you really want to see. Okay, so the first feature I want to go over is the new stem splitter. This allows you to take any stereo mix and split it up into vocals, drums, bass, and other instruments. So here I've got a stereo mix and master. This is a fully mixed and mastered song. But you can't break free. Just sleep right there. I'll be gone. Don't tell me that you're faithless. Tell me that you feel this. Lots of reverb, lots of saturation, lots of things that stem splitters don't particularly like. Let's give this a shot. So what you're going to do is select the region, right click or control click, go down to processing, and then select stem splitter. And it'll bring up the stem splitter dialog where you can choose what elements of the song you want to split out. So I'm just going to select all of these, hit split. I have to say, while this is loading, I've used just about every stem splitter out there, and This is just about one of the best ones, if not the best one I've heard. If your track is like mine and it has a lot of reverb and a lot of saturation, there's a little bit of crackliness to the stems. But for example, if you wanted to lift a vocal out of a song and do your own remix, and if you mix it right, like you probably won't even be able to tell that it was an extracted stem. The other thing I'm really impressed with this stem splitter is its ability to preserve the quality of the vocals and also the reverb in the vocals. So if I just want to hear the vocals now.
You've got it all, but you can't break free. Just sleep right there in your frozen state.
So we're hearing a little bit of crackling from the drums, from the top end transients in the drums. Yeah, that's totally good enough if you wanted to extract like some samples from a song. Here's the bass. Yeah, getting a little bit of crackling in there just from the drums and then the keys.
Out of time, you know we've gotta grow up, create the season, sow them. I told you that we're running out of time.
So that is the new stem splitter. If you just wanted to lift a vocal from a song or like sample some drums from a song, you could totally do that here. Or maybe you want to remaster one of your old projects and you just want to change up the mix a bit more, maybe in your old version of your band's song from 20 years ago. Maybe the vocals are a little too low in the mix and you want to pop those out a bit in the remaster. This is a really easy way to do that and recover and restore and remaster those old recordings. Next up, let's talk about the new session players. So in addition to drummer, now you have a bass player and keyboard player, and these are AI assisted generative players that, just like with drummer, they've been modeled from performances of real life professional musicians. So let's start with drummer, and I'm going to go with the indie disco kit here, just so I can keep the beat. One thing you'll notice is that the drummer interface is completely different. We're going to come back to that, so don't worry about that for now. But let's go ahead and add some bass to this. So I'll start by just creating a new track, go to bass player, and then you can choose the type of bass player you want to work with. So just like with drummer, where you had different styles of drummers, here we have different styles of bass players. So let's go with disco slap here. Click create. And what it's going to do by default is it's going to create a chord progression in the key that you have selected. So we'll come back to the chord track in just a bit. So the bass player is following the chord progression and the tempo here. And just like with drummer, you can double click on this and it opens up its own session player editor here for the bass. You can choose different bass players here. So maybe I want to go with pop rock instead. I can do that. It loads up a new bass player. Let's try one of these other disco presets. Here we go. Indie disco. Let's try that one out. So one of the big changes, especially like just visually and where these things are located, is that the session player is going to be selected down here in the session player editor, not up here in the library like it was before. And then don't forget, you have your different presets you can pick from here. So I can try out a different pattern here. And there are different controls in here too. The complexity and intensity are basically just the XY controls that were in drummer before. So complexity is how complex is the bass line, how many notes are there, and then the intensity is the dynamic. So maybe I want something a little simpler, but something with a pretty loud dynamic. You can choose from different preset patterns that will sort of show you the probability of a note appearing in any one of these locations. So if you think of each one of these dots is like a 16th note. This allows you to sort of change up the emphasis and the accents. Let's go back to that slap bass player. I think it was really cool. And there are a bunch of other controls down here, like adding fills, complexity, adding swing, setting your lowest note. Under details, there's even more options. And under manual, you can actually type in your own pattern. So I could do something like this maybe. And now the bass player is going to follow that pattern. So that's really cool. You can create your own rhythm still, or stick with the presets. Next up, let's talk about the session keyboard player. So I'll hit Option Command N to create a new track. Let's go with the keyboard player and let's use the freely character. Just like with the drummers and bass players, you could choose a different sort of style, and then you have your different presets up here. Okay, so maybe the keyboard player's a little too intense. Let's pull back the dynamics. Maybe make this a little more complex. Once again, you've got different pattern presets you can pick from, a bunch of different controls to customize the pattern. Under details, you can add more grace notes. You can do a push or pull feel. You can play with the dynamics, and you can humanize it. Under manual, once again, you can create your own pattern if you prefer. But one of the things that's really cool about the keyboard session player is you can turn on or off the left and right hand parts. And you can also adjust the voicing and style of the left and right hands. So let's say, for example, at the beginning here, maybe I wanted to start off with something that was sort of in a higher register. I could cut these out, go to the keyboard player, open this up. Let's take out the left hand. In the bass, let's open this up. Let's make the lowest note E2 instead of E1. Let's also pull down the intensity. I'll also pull down the intensity for the keyboards as well. And so now in these first 4 bars, I'm going to get sort of a higher and softer intensity. And then at bar 5, the bass is going to drop down an octave and the keyboard's going to throw in the left hand. Now, just like you can swap out the drum instrument on drummer tracks, you can swap out the bass instrument on bass session player tracks, as well as the piano on the keyboard session player. Now, the studio piano and studio bass instruments we're going to come back to in just a bit. But let's say instead of piano here, maybe I want the electric piano instead. And if you want full control over your arrangements, remember, you can always select these regions, right-click or control-click, go down to Convert, and you can select Convert to MIDI region, so you can get into the piano roll editor and you can really fine-tune these parts on a note-by-note basis if you prefer. What powers all of these session players is the brand new Chord Track, or I really shouldn't say brand new because I believe there was a Chord Track in earlier versions of Logic, but they brought it back. And what you can do is you can use this. It's a global track. So you just press G to open it up, to open up your global tracks, and you'll see the Chord Track here. If you don't see it, just right click and then show the Chord Track. And by default, if you create a bass player or keyboard player track, this will automatically introduce a default chord progression in the key that you have set up here in the LCD display. But what I can do is I can double click and I can select an individual chord, like maybe B minor 7 here. I've already got a B minor 7 over here. So this is a 1, 5, 4, 5 progression in E minor. Let's swap out this B chord for a 6 chord, which would be a C chord. So you just right click or control click, select edit chord, and then I can choose whatever chord I want here. So let's go C. We'll do a major triad, and then we'll add a seventh to this. And then I can just click out of there. And now the arrangement has been updated for both the bass and the keyboards. You know what? That's a C7. That's a dominant 7. Let's make this a major 7. And if you need some help creating chord progressions and you just want to start with a different progression, you can right click or control click and choose some options for a chord progression. So here's a 1, 3, 6, 7 progression. Maybe there's too many triads. Let's juice it up a bit with some extended harmonies. Let's make this C major triad a C major 7. And let's make this D major triad a D6. And if using all whole note chords is a little boring, you can trim these up to change up their rhythm, and you can even add in new chords by right-clicking or control-clicking and selecting Create Chord to add a new chord anywhere in your arrangement. And then once again, you can trim this, you can move it, so you have full control over the position of your chords as well. In addition to our 2 new session players, Drummer has also received some significant updates. Mainly, it's been completely redesigned with a new user interface. So instead of selecting your drummers in the library over here like you usually would, you're now going to select your drummers down here. So you just click here. You can choose what drummer you want to load up from here. And you can also choose different drummer types. So you can choose between acoustic, electronic, percussionists, and you can even switch over to the bass player and keyboard player here as well. And then all of your presets are going to be loaded up here in this top menu. Just like with the old version of Drummer, you have a complexity and intensity option. Instead of an XY pad, it's now just 2 separate sliders. And just like with the bass and keyboard players, you can choose custom rhythmic patterns. But with Drummer, they take it a step further by separating the kick and snare from the hi-hats, ride cymbal, or toms. So the kick and snare pattern, you can just click here and you'll see there are different preset kick and snare patterns. So this first one's just sort of a 4 on the floor. But I could also change this up to a different pattern. Or if I want to completely take out the snare, I can do that too. Now with this upper pattern, you can choose between a hi-hat pattern, or if you prefer a ride cymbal led pattern, you can click the ride cymbal and choose a custom pattern for it as well. Or if you want a tom-led groove, you can choose the tom option. You can adjust your amount of fills and your fill complexity. You can add swing. Under the Details tab, you can add more ghost notes. Let's change up the pattern here. Let's go back to pattern 2 there. So now we're getting a lot of ghost notes in between the beats with the snare drum. You can even customize the tone of the snare drum by choosing the sticking technique and the position of where the snares hit. So I can choose to add in rim shots or side sticks if I like. Additionally, you can choose the technique you're using for the hi-hat. So I can choose closed, half open, half closed, or even wide open. So this just gives you a ton of additional variability with Drummer to make your drum pattern sound even more realistic. And if there's a particular pattern you want for the kick and snare, in the manual tab, you can create your own custom kick and snare pattern. So maybe I want something like this. And Drummer will create different fills and different variations around your manual kick and snare pattern. Now, in addition to these really cool Drummer updates, Drum Kit Designer, the instrument that powers Drummer, all of the Drum Kit Designer samples have been completely remixed. But in addition to that, each kit piece in Drum Machine Designer can be swapped out for any other kit piece available in Drum Kit Designer. So previously, you would click on the kick or the snare or the toms, and you would just get 3 different options to pick from for each kit. Now you can swap out any kit piece for any drum kit. So instead of the 4 on the floor kick, maybe I want the Liverpool kick. And instead of 4 on the floor snare, maybe I want the Liverpool snare or the Manchester snare. You can swap out the toms. And what's really awesome is you can even swap out the cymbals. So if you select the crash cymbals, you can choose different types of crash cymbals. Select the ride cymbal. You can customize the ride as well. And you can even do this with the hi-hat as well. So now I've fully customized my kit. Driving the session bass player and session keyboard player are the brand new Studio Bass and Studio Piano instruments. Studio Bass introduces 5 new electric basses and 1 acoustic upright bass. So depending on what session bass player you load up, you'll get a different type of Studio Bass preset. But these plugins don't have to be used exclusively with the session players. You can load up the instrument on any software instrument as well. Now, right now I'm using the 60s bass, which is a Hofner style bass. Classic is a Fender P bass. Rock is a Rickenbacker style bass. Session is what looks like some sort of a Fender jazz bass. And modern is some sort of an Ernie Ball Music Man Stingray bass. Each bass's tone can be fully customized using the main and details tabs, and you'll notice that the controls change from instrument to instrument. And in addition to these great electric basses, there's also a new American upright acoustic bass. In addition to Studio Bass, there's also a brand new Studio Piano instrument. Logic has always had really great sampled piano instruments, but this takes that to another level. This is a completely new set of 4 pianos. You have the Studio Grand 1 mic, so this is more of a simple, more direct sounding grand piano. You have Studio Grand, which is a multi-mic'd piano, so you can actually control the volume of the mono mic and 2 stereo mics individually. You have a Concert Grand. And lastly, a vintage upright. This one also has different miking positions as well. And those little clicks and pops in there you're hearing, that's intentional pedal noise and key noise that you can pull down if you want to hear less of it, or pull up for that added realism. All right, next up is the new ChromaGlow audio effects plugin. This is an AI-powered saturation and distortion plugin. This is great for adding saturation to individual tracks, buses, or use it to saturate your masters. Now, in ChromaGlow, there are 5 models you can pick from: retro tube, modern tube, magnetic, which is like tape, squeeze, and analog preamp. And there's also 2 styles for each model. Additionally, you can bypass frequencies below a certain range, and if you turn it off, you're going to be affecting the full frequency spectrum. And there's even a mix blend, so you can dial up the drive to 100% and then just blend in the amount of saturation you want. And it also includes a low cut and high cut filter. So let's give this a shot on some keyboards in the intro of my track here. Okay, so I think I like the magnetic model the best. I'm going to pull the drive up quite a bit, but I'm going to pull the mix blend down. So we're blending a little bit of the original signal, which sounds like this. It's just a really boring electric piano. And then when we add in a bit of this drive and saturation, this gives this instrument quite a bit of new character. And like I said before, you can also try using this on your masters. So here I've got it loaded up on the stereo output. I'm going to load up the magnetic model. And this time I'm going to bypass the lower frequency so that the saturation is only being applied to the top end. So that's just adding that little bit of saturation and lift I need to really make the track pop. Next up, let's talk about the new real-time bounce in place feature. This one's going to be really helpful if you use external hardware synthesizers, or if you use the I/O plugin like I do to route tracks over to external mixing hardware. So right now I'm using the I/O plugin through channels 7 and 8 on my audio interface to just give this drum track a bit of a lift using my Neve Portico 2 master bus processor. Now, prior to Logic 11, you would have to create a new audio track and then sort of bust this down and print that audio in place. Logic 11 now supports real-time bounce in place. So if you select the regions that you want to bounce in place, press Control B to bring up your bounce regions in place dialog and click OK. What this will do is it'll do a real-time bounce in place of that selection. Now, when doing this, it automatically dims the level, but this is a huge time saver, again, if you use external hardware synths or mixing hardware like me, because you want to be able to print these things in place, render them in place, so that you can use that piece of hardware again for another track. And if you don't have the external instrument or IO plugin on the track, the bounce in place function will just work as normal and do an offline bounce instead. So it automatically detects whether you need a real-time bounce or not. Okay, so after the bounce in place is complete, you can see it's muted the original regions. And down here, you can see I have a stereo audio file with that drum part printed through my Portico. Okay, so the very last update is kind of a minor one, but if you use the Marquee tool for audio editing, this one's a nice one to know, especially if you do a lot of sort of tabbing to transients and precise transient or drum editing. In Logic 11, they've created 8 new key commands for use with the Marquee tool to adjust its position and placement. So if you go up to Logic Pro key commands, edit assignments, and you search up Marquee, you'll notice there are 4 new key commands here and 4 new key commands here for the Marquee tool. So these are option up and down, option right and left, shift option up and down, and shift option right and left. So what do these do? Okay, so if you use the Marquee tool and you just click somewhere with it, you can press the right and left arrow keys to sort of tap into Logic's tab to transients feature. And if you hold shift while doing this, you can make a selection. Now, this is nothing new. This has been around for a while, so that's not the new feature. What is new is the ability to shift the selection up or down. So if you hold option and press up, this will shift the Marquee selection up. If I press down, it'll shift it down. But you can't go any lower than where your selection was. Well, there's another key command for that. If you press shift option and press down, you can move your selection down, press it up, and you can move it up. So option to go up, shift option to go down. Now, an additional feature is the ability to shift the left or right position of the Marquee selection by the nudge value. So your nudge value can be shown up here. If you show your toolbar, you can set your nudge value. Usually it's set to 1 tick. So if you make a Marquee selection and then press option left or right, you'll see that this adjusts the position of the beginning of the Marquee selection by the nudge value. If I set this to a larger value, like 10 milliseconds, you see it jumps, a bit quicker. On the back end, if you press shift option and then the right or left arrow keys, this will nudge the position of the right side of the Marquee selection. So again, very minor update, but worth mentioning. Okay, so those are the 11 main new features in Logic Pro 11 with parity on Logic Pro for iPad 2. If you like this video, please do me a huge favor and give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. I know most of you who watch my channel are not subscribed, so please sub to the channel. It really helps me out and it really helps to drive engagement. And I'm really hoping to get to 1 million subscribers within the next couple of years. So please help me out with this if you can. Now, as for my Ultimate Guide to Logic Pro series, I'm not stopping that series. I'm going to finish it, but then I'm going to move on to some new Logic 11 content very soon. In fact, I'll have new Logic 11 videos up just about every day this week. And if you need mixing or production work done, or you want to check out one of my sample libraries for Logic Pro, head over to my website, carneymediagroup.com. As always, thank you so much for the support, and thanks for watching.